Okay, we're up to chapter 3 now of The Wolf Wilder. Theo had begun wilding wolves alone since she was 10 years old, but never had she had to do it in secret, never with the back of her neck prickling. Wilding was best done alone, and Marina left her to attend to a sick dog 10 miles off. Wilders in Russia often doubled as vets, but her face as she went was unsettled. "Keep your knife sharp, keep your eyes sharper, my darling," she said. "Remember that." Now Theo crouched in the snow in front of Tenderfoot. The days had grown bruisingly cold, and her breath together with the wolf's formed a cloud around their heads. "Are you ready?" she asked. She knew the wilding stages. She had recited them before bed since she was 4. "First," she whispered to herself, "ascertain what world the wolf has come from." Some of the wolves who came to them were manic and snappish and took very little time to rewild. Some were timid and jumpy and barely able to walk. "Sit," she said to the wolf. Tenderfoot sat carefully, her 4 feet arranged as neat as a laid-out table. "Down, lie down." Tenderfoot lay down in the snow. She did not take her eyes off Theo. "Paw?" Theo asked. The wolf sat up, licked her paw with exquisite courtesy and held it out to Theo. Theo didn't take it. "Beg?" Tenderfoot twitched, then hesitated. The expression in her eyes was mutinous. Theo grimaced. She tried to make her voice aristocratic. "Beg!" The wolf rose instantly onto her hind legs and lolled her tongue. Her face was that of a duchess on finding a dead rat under her bed. Theo laughed. "Yes, I know. Society wolves could always beg, hold out a paw, lie still." Often it made Theo want to cry. They could dance on their hind legs, their faces blank. "Once," she said to Tenderfoot, "we had a brown alpha, sort of tawny-coloured, who could pull the trigger of a rifle with his nose, which is a ridiculous thing to teach him, as if a wolf needs a gun." Usually she would test if the wolf could howl, but that, she thought, would be as obvious as writing out an invitation to Rakov. We need to be quiet if we can." She pulled Tenderfoot closer to a tree and said, "Sit for now." Theo sat too in the ankle-deep snow. Her cloak had an oilskin finish that kept the cold out more or less. It was second-hand and much too long, but her mother had pinned it up so that it swirled around her ankles when she ran. "I wish they wouldn't teach you to beg. Theo hesitated. "It was like telling a god to clean your shoes. It makes me want to bite stupid people." She looked inside the wolf's ear. "Stupid rich people." There was the sound behind them of falling snow. Theo whipped round. "Hello?" she called. "Who's there?" And then, "I can see you, come out." There was silence. "If you're watching, you need to know that I have a knife and an angry wolf." Tenderfoot tucked her nose inside Theo's armpit and whimpered. Not sounding that angry, is she, the wolf at the moment? "She's more murderous than she looks," Theo called into the silence. One of the trees scattered its load of snow onto the ground below, and a crow as big as Theo's head took off from the branches. Theo held her breath, but nothing else moved. She stood and looked around for footprints. The snow was wind-churned, but she could see no footmarks. She crouched down again, her heart beating a little faster. "Stupid," said Theo again. Tenderfoot's hackles were on end. Theo smoothed them down. We're all right, I think. Shh, Lapushka. I won't let anyone hurt you. She tugged the wolf to her feet. Come, we'll find you a good tree. I'll show you how wolves build their dens. She led the wolf to where the trees were thickest and began to pile snow. As she worked, Theo told the wolf about the land around her new home. Theo's part of Russia was a place that the world had, by and large, decided to pass by. The hilltops absorbed the cold, and the snow there lay thicker and stiffer than anywhere for 100 miles. If you stood on the tallest hill and looked to the north, there were the woods, hills and stone barracks of the soldiers. The soldiers used to be a bunch of harmless drunks, sent into the countryside to be out of the way, but since Rakov's arrival, Theo had heard regimental orders shouted on the wind. Sometimes at night there were screams. Beyond the soldiers' grey buildings were flat countryside, snow-covered fields and trees, and then far off and merging with the clouds, the smoke of St. Petersburg. See, said Theo to the black wolf, and to the south there's just snow, and snow and snow. And then, see here, if you squint, she shielded the wolf's eyes with her hand, more snow. Theo loved it. The land around the house shook and shone with life. She had seen people pass by her wood, bewailing the sameness of the white landscape. But they were just illiterate. They hadn't learnt how to read the world properly. The snow gossiped and hinted at storms and birds. It told a new story every morning. Theo grinned and sniffed the sharpness of the air. It's the most talkative weather there is, she told Tenderfoot. Her world was not, of course, all perfect. The few children in the farms were much older than her, almost grown up, with the beginnings of beards, or too young and liable to cry and vomit unreasonably if she came near the wolf pack. Theo liked the look of some of the older ones, but they laughed when she tried to join them and said she was a child and she smelt of wolves. Theo found it hard to act normally around strangers. She would be too silent or rough when she'd hoped to be funny. For weeks and months later, some of the things she had said would come back to haunt her, and she would have to bury her head in the snow to cool down her cheeks. Adults, in Theo's experience, often backed away when they met her. Her mother said it might, possibly, be because she stared at them. But the wolves stared too, and no one reprimanded them. And the wolves were enough. They were better than enough. And two of the wolves, as Theo pointed out whenever her mother became anxious about her possible loneliness, were technically girls of about her own age. I know they don't speak Russian, said Theo, but that doesn't mean we don't understand each other. White was the acknowledged beauty of the pack, and when Theo buried her face in the wolf's neck, the fur was so soft it felt almost wet. She was young, and the male wolves who passed through seemed to agree. Glamorous. Her snout was narrow enough to fit inside Theo's ear. Most wolves are born with blue eyes which turn yellow or gold at 3 months. White's had remained blue. And there was Grey. Grey was a few months older than Theo, and Marina had fought a wolf hunter for her when she was a newborn pup. A fight that ended in a broken nose from Marina and a week in hospital for the hunter. Perhaps because her first day on earth had been so stressful, Grey's temper was large and unwieldy. The flick of her ears suggested she was invincible. Theo was not afraid of Grey because Theo refused on principle to be afraid of any animal. But if she'd had to be, it would definitely have been Grey she would have chosen. It's hard to be absolutely sure, Theo told Black, that she's not going to bite off some part of me I'd rather keep. Black had been sold for 4,000 rubles because of the beauty of his coat, and until he found Theo, he had loved nobody. When he first came to the cabin in the woods, he had been fat, with a bottom large enough to block a doorway. Now, though, he was awe-inspiring and the best friend anyone could dream of. On his hind legs, Black was tall enough to make 2 Theos, and she knew from experience his paws were as big as Theo's face. But Black was lightning quick. To see a wolf run, Theo reckoned, is to see something extraordinary, because she told Tenderfoot, a real wolf runs in the way that a thunderstorm would run if it had legs. That's what you're aiming for, all right? Theo straightened up and rubbed Tenderfoot's ears. The wolf flinched and whined. Lapushka, you look like you wouldn't know where to find your own teeth. Many of the wolves who came to them, captured at birth and kept on chains, had never run further than the length of a drawing room. We're going to do some running now, said Theo. Do you know running? It's like walking, only more of it. Tenderfoot stepped into a dip in the ground, found the snow was suddenly up to her stomach, and collapsed in a panicked heap. Her head tucked down to her stomach. Theo reached into the snow, found the wolf's belly and pulled her to her feet. She weighed as much as Theo herself. Wolves, she said, are supposed to be bold and gallant and fierce. She rubbed Tenderfoot's ears. You might need to work on that. Theo tightened the leather straps of her skis, wiped the icy mist off her hair before it could turn solid, and tucked it down back inside her shirt. Follow me now. She pushed forward and dropped off the edge of the hill. The sound of the wind in the trees made it difficult to tell if the wolf was following, but usually they came stumbling after her instinctively. Theo turned. The wolf sat at the top of the hill, peering down, a dinner party expression on her face. Theo bit away the solid snot icing on her lip, spat it out and stamped, crisscrossing with her skis back up the hill. You're very beautiful, you know. But you have the instincts of a carpet, said Theo. Come on, we're trying to do this quickly. Mama's worried. She took a bone from her pocket and skied in a circle around the wolf. Come on, Tenderfoot. Theo reached the lip of the hill and tipped backwards over the edge. The wolf followed, not neatly or gracefully, but at least she was running. They made half a mile's worth of slow progress before the wolf stopped, turned once in a circle and fell asleep. Theo grinned and clamped a fist over Tenderfoot's jaw and shook it gently. Wake up! This isn't the place for sleeping. You were very good, though, for a beginner. Here. She held out the bone. The wolf's tongue was rough and hungry against her palm. As Tenderfoot chewed, Theo felt the hairs lift along her arms and the base of her neck, and for a moment was unsure why. She laid a hand on the wolf's neck. With the other, she felt at her waist for her knife. It came again, a smell in the wind. Just an elk, she said out loud. A damp elk. But it smelt, in fact, of damp human clothing. She stared around the clearing, only snow and sky turning the slanting pinks of sunset. She straightened up. Quick, we need to hide you for the night. Usually the wolves who came to be made wild slept under the trees, but since Rakov's visit, Mama said everything had to be different. Come, Theo led the wolf up to the house, glancing over her shoulder every other step, trying to keep her back to the trees. Hurry, we'll put you by the stove just for tonight. You must try not to eat the cutlery. We had a wolf once who ate all of the forks and it gave him indigestion. That's the end of chapter 3. I wonder if someone was watching what Theo was doing.